Hi, I'm Samantha Harvey and I am the author of Orbital.
How would you describe Orbital, your novel, in one sentence?
Orbital is a novel that takes place over one 24-hour period, orbiting the Earth in a space station and takes place over 16 orbits around the planet.
Where did the inspiration for this story come from?
When I was a teenager, I was looking at, I spent a lot of time looking at images in books of the Earth from space. I don't know why, but this was something I liked to do, and I also like to collect quotes from astronauts, so things that they had said after space missions. And when I was I'd sort of forgotten about that preoccupation, but when I was coming to write my next novel, I wanted to write a book that was about the natural world and that felt attentive to the natural world and quite reverential, and also that was somewhat melancholic and nostalgic about the facts of what we're doing to the planet, but really a book that was about beauty. And these quotes from astronauts came back to me. I thought about them and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to set a novel in orbit that was looking at the Earth and could do a kind of nature writing about the Earth, but from that perspective, particularly given that we as a species do live in space. You know, we have been living in space for 25 years on the ISS. There's a realist novel there to be written, and a novel that is about, that sort of could feel pastoral, that can feel that it's about the natural world, but from a quite radically different viewpoint.
Have you heard from any astronauts who have been to space and read your book? What do they think?
I have, yeah. So while I was writing the book, I didn't speak to any astronauts, and I did think, when I read books by them and I watched countless interviews with them, and I stalked them online, but I didn't speak to any. And I did think when I was writing the book, I'd be terrified if an astronaut reads this book. What will they think about someone, in southwest England, sort of sitting there just making stuff up about what they do? It seemed quite impertinent of me to write it in some ways, and I thought, I'd be happy if no astronauts read it, but some have, and a couple of them have been in touch with me, and they've been incredibly generous. I found that the whole scientific community actually has been incredibly generous towards this book. Receptive to it and open to it, and there's a sort of a warmth there, a readiness, I think, for some people in the scientific community, and particularly in the sort of spacefaring community, to try to widen the remit to the arts.
Did all of your research and writing of this story make you want to go to space? Do you think you would make a good astronaut?
Oh, I would make a terrible astronaut. Terrible. I'm incredibly unadventurous, the least intrepid person in the universe. I get travel sick, I get height sick, I'm overly emotional. I would be terrible. And nobody would want me as part of their crew. Would I go if I could? It probably not. I think I would love to see the Earth from space, for real, not through a YouTube video, not through the ISS live camera. I would love to see it.
The International Space Station is going to be deorbited in 2030, which is coming up. It's the end of an era. What do you hope the world remembers about the ISS and what it stood for?
One of the reasons I wanted to write this book, and one of the reasons that I sort of got excited about the idea of setting it on a space station, was because I could see that the lifespan of the ISS was coming to an end, and I could see that this peaceful era of space travel that has been sort of occupying the last 25 years, really, is coming to an end. And the peace project that is the ISS is coming to an end. And we can see very clearly that we are entering, or have already entered, a very new paradigm in terms of world politics and the way nations come together or don't come together, and the complete collapse of the relationship between Russia and the West. For me, it was always a book that was about looking with some degree of nostalgia, I think, at the passing of that era and the fact that we are moving into something quite different and that isn't centered upon the earth, that isn't a kind of collaborative project between nations that is circling the earth and looking back at the earth, but one that is much more driven by individuals, much more exploitative, much more sort of a land grab to go to the moon and to get back to Mars, and one that is getting away from the earth, sort of turning its back on the earth and going further away. And I think, although some of that is, is part of a natural human curiosity, I think there's a sadness there for me, as I feel it's more of an abstract conceptual sadness, I think, about the ending of a relatively peaceful era. And that era is very much, I think, symbolized by the ISS. It's been an incredibly powerful peace project.
Do you know that NASA named the treadmill aboard the ISS Colbert? Combined Operational Load-Bearing External Resistance Treadmill. What item on the ISS would you want named after you?
That's a really good question. I think it would be. This is a slightly counterintuitive answer, but I think I would want. There are these little cages, units in which the mice live on the ISS. I have a great kind of feeling for these mice. I feel incredibly sorry for them in some senses because they're not surviving that mission. At the same time, what incredible creatures they are to have, been through the atmosphere and to have found themselves in low Earth orbit, and many of them go back to Earth and are plunged into the Pacific and are rescued from there and then are later sacrificed to science. They really are sort of wonderful, heroic, even if unwittingly heroic creatures. And also, they get to learn to move in microgravity while they're there, and that's very moving. So I think that maybe it would be that unit that the poor mice live in. I'd just like to give them something to dignify them a little.
If you did go spend a few months on the International Space Station and you could bring one book, what book would it be?
That's an almost impossible question to answer. Um, I'm gonna say possibly Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I mean, I've read it so many times, so it's probably a bad choice. I probably should take a book I've never read, but I always find new depth in it, and it always makes me want to write.
Do you have a piece of advice you give to aspiring writers?
I, the only advice I really think is useful is that, at least for myself, everything that every problem I have ever solved with writing has come in the doing. It's never. It might be that I go for a walk and something becomes a bit clearer for me. That might be true, but I think that the problems of the novel and all the challenges that it sets the writer are never solved by thinking about it. They're only solved by sitting and writing it and working your way through them and coming to one dead end after another and backing up and going down a different corridor, maybe backing up again, learning through trial and error. It's not an efficient process for me ever. It's not quick, and I sometimes despair of how I can keep stumbling. With every novel I can stumble over the same things as if it was my first novel, but each novel has its own very particular set of problems and challenges, and you can only resolve them, I think, by writing.
Thanks, Samantha. For more Late Show Book Club, follow @Colbert Late Show.